No, actually, my birth name on my official certificate in Kenya, it's Firoz. But around the time I was 6 or 7, my family changed the name to Sultan. And I grew up with this kind of dichotomy of the names because I was called birth certificate and all the official documents would be Firoz. But then, in schools, when you went to register before, you didn't really need birth certificates. At my time, we're talking about 40s. And then it just continued with the name Sultan, but officially it was Firoz. But later on, yeah, I had a lot of difficulties because of the official name as on the birth certificate and other names in all the documents in Kenya, like my school certificates and my exams and everything else. I was known as Sultan. So I had this dichotomy. And then when I came to Canada, then they were living in these two names. Between the two names, I changed it to Firoz Sultan Somjee. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we were thinking that we would begin with your early childhood, so that there's an introduction to where you come from, and then we anchor the story of the human being that is Sultan Somjee to your beginnings, your origin stories.
Okay.
So could you tell us something about your earliest years? So you were born in Africa.
Yeah, I was born in Nairobi, and I grew up in an area called Eastleigh. Now, Eastleigh was originally a white settlement where the white farmers had come to plant coffee, but the coffee didn't do well in black cotton soil. So they left, and my grandfather bought some land there, and he built a house, and then we were there. And as far as I remember of my childhood, we were kind of the only house there, and behind us was a mission, St. Teresa's mission. And then about 10-15 minutes away from our house was a valley. It's now famously called the Mathari Valley, one of the largest slums in Kenya. And so my earliest memories are playing in that valley and in the stream, Mathari River, which was pristine, clean water. And we would go there again with, my friends around neighborhood and swim there, pretend to swim because we didn't know how to swim, but we would walk and do this and say we were swimming. So later on, little by little, the Mathari Valley started growing because the Nubian soldiers from the British Army were settled there. They didn't go back to Nubia in Sudan, but they were settled in Mathari Valley. Now that would be, and then they started a little village there, which was fine. And then as I grew up, the valley grew with me.
Okay, to have some context, what year are we talking about?
Okay, we are talking early 40s up to 50. Now, the valley grew with me in the sense that more and more people came to settle in the valley. The Eastleigh area, which was just Somali houses, and there was a military airport there, a British military airport, and that's about all. And there was St. Teresa's Church, and because of the church, we had Goans who came and settled around the church, and some of them who were well-to-do built stone houses. So my kind of memories are of me growing up was with the growth of this valley, Mathari Valley. And then later on, of course, it's today one of the largest slums in Nairobi. and especially after independence, with land grabbing around the country by the elites, the farmers came there, the pastoralists came there. People came and settled in Mathari Valley to look for work in the city, which was, on the other hand, it was growing. And it's a dazzling a comparison, because the city is, the glass city, which is beautiful, is on the hill there, and there is a valley here in the bottom. And then in the valley are all the slums, and the city is there. So I grew up with this dichotomous view of Nairobi and my life in Kenya.
Thank you. So, you were telling me about your early life in Africa. So, how do you want to continue your narrative?
Of course, it's a long, long life, but what I could say, I'll give you some turning points in my life. Now, one was in the 50s was Mau Mau, and my father, who was in the British military, and the war ended in 1944, and then he still worked for the military, and they gave him a canteen to run in the military camp. But the military camp there was also a part of, they also had an arms arsenal, arms that were used by, I think, mostly Italians and the old British arms. They couldn't ship them back to England, so they had a big arsenal there in Nairobi. Now, somehow, my brother, of course, in the 50s, from, let's say, 10 years onwards, I studied at a mission school. It was called St. Teresa's Boys' School. And it was only for Asians, and mostly the Asians were all Catholics. And I think I was the only one who was not a Catholic, so I had this identity of being non-Catholic. And it was very interesting for me, because here I found people who were very different from who I was. And my first experience of going into the church was also quite staggering for me as such. So these are all kind of my awareness, becoming awareness of other cultures, other places. It was a regular kind of curriculum under the British system. It was called the Cambridge School Certificate, and we wrote for an exam in it was called Cambridge Living Certificate exam. We wrote for it for England. Our papers went to England. Our questions came from England. And so it was regular, but it was in a kind of a box, you know. You can't really get to know who you are. And the syllabus I did was the history of Great Britain and everything about Great Britain, even the geography of Great Britain. So my mind grew up as London being the focus of the world, the center of the world, you know. That was just, so I was not much. Then from 5, from 6, not much difference. Okay, we studied, I went for literature, geography, but it was still British Isles and, of course, English literature.
And you said something about self-education.
Yeah, then I did. Yeah, but what came back to me was when I went to the university, and first I joined it, and then at that time, in the early 60s, the first African books were coming out by Chinua Achebe, for example, Things Fall Apart, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's River Between and A Grain of Wheat, Kameralai. So I started reading those books and I could relate to them. I felt wonderful about it. So I said, okay, I'll take my degree in literature. So I joined the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi. Whoa, when they gave me the book reading list, I saw the same old story, Chaucer and Shakespeare, and not that they're bad, but all, I said, no, I can't study, I can't go over this, I thought, and of course I heard Gugi wa Thiong'o was in the Department of Literature, and other than it was a nationalist awakening. Everything was being African, and they're talking about Africanization. So, yeah. So what happened was that I changed the department. I joined the Department of Design, Art, and Architecture. There was a joint department then, and there, okay, it was dealing mostly with built environment and crafted objects and paintings and all, but still the syllabus was very, very British based.
So, Sultan, you talked a little bit about the colonial nature of your education to this point.
Yeah.
And there were obviously some transformations that were beginning to occur in your own thinking and how you were seeing yourself as a student and as an adult. Can you talk about those influences and what was going through your own process?
Oh, yeah. Actually, what happened was when I joined the Department for Design, Architecture, and Art, one of the topics we certainly was aesthetics. Yeah. And this was a high African nationalism. And now, the university employed some professors who were graduates from the Makerere School.
Uh-huh.
Now, Makerere School was the first, I think, in Eastern Africa school of art. So they came to teach us, but I found that they were not what I thought was African art and African aesthetics at that time. Now, I'll tell you why. Because we had, my extended family, we had a beads shop in Arusha, in Tanzania, which is close to Kenyan border. And that's, the whole thing is a Maasai area. And we sold beads to the Maasai. So what happened was the bead shop was managed by women, and there was one matriarch, one woman, because it was tedious work, the men would not touch it. They would rather do some accounts and things. So the women would be sorting of beads and all that. And then they would bring the children around them to help them. It was a tedious work, really. And and then I was sorting out beads, sitting on the floor there. The Ma would be sitting on a chair like that, and we would be sitting down here and going through the beads. And the Maasais would come in and out, women and all that, and I could sense their presence, and I could get the smell of the ochre on their bodies and on the skins they were wearing. And then visually, the sight was astounding. Just around me, all around me. They would, because where we were sitting, it was in the veranda, there was a panel, and on the panel were put all the beads. So they would come and sort out the beads, and they would be discussing and talking with the beads, and they would be handling and feeling the beads. So there was a lot of sensory communication, even among them. And I think right now, with my recent research, is how much I sensed it, and how much I thought this was art, and how I learned the indigenous aesthetics, how the Maasai constituted their patterns. They made tremendous numbers of ornaments, and the beads, which are really huge over there. But people think, oh, beads. But it's such a codified, patterned communication there in all those beads, and how they look at beauty. So which was always a dilemma for me. And so at the University of Nairobi, all our professors, although Africans, they didn't quite understand. What they did was what they learned was from the books that came from the US and whatnot. And at the most, they would talk about Picasso and how Picasso was influenced by African sculpture. And most of the books and most of the theories came from West Africa. And West Africa was all very sculptural, but not looking at what is the aesthetics, what is the aesthetics behind it. And that was my great transformative time.
Into material culture.
Yeah, and then I really had a conflict with my professors. So what I say, the struggle with my professors, and they nearly failed me, and was the energy and the determination that led me on to my self-education, and the struggle stayed. And luckily, I was supported my theories by a Scandinavian professor at the university called Christian Biddle. Now, he was a well-known and he came from the Scandinavian school where they looked at the people's lives and people's art and developed design out of it. So then on, I painted, I did woven fabrics, whatever, everything, and presented that as my work on African aesthetics. I think the African professors failed me, but because of this one professor, it just scrapped me through my first degree and gave me a fellowship to study at the Royal Academy of Art, Design, and what else? Architecture in Copenhagen.
Okay.
So I went to study there for 2 years, reading period. And later on, the struggle, it stayed with me, but what is African study? And I made my PhD out of it.
All right. So, you've had a very rich background in terms of your education, and you went on to get your PhD at McGill, and museology had become your major theme. What we want to know now is a little bit about just a very brief synopsis of your time in Kenya, and then what were some of the forces that caused you to begin to think about moving out of Kenya and coming to Canada. So it has to be a brief synopsis.
You see, what happened was in 1994, after the Rwandan massacre, which really came like a big black cloud in Eastern Africa over us. And then there were so many sporadic ethnic fightings all over Eastern Africa. And I was the head of ethnography at the National Museums of Kenya. And a lot of foreigners, especially Americans, came to help us and tell us that I'm saying it very blankly, we teach you how to make peace. And peace and conflict resolution. Now that became the key word to kind of bring peace to Africa, resolve all the conflicts in Africa, and there were quite a few of them, and peace and conflict resolution became it became a department in almost every university. And with that came all the NGOs and all the experts. And I was the head of ethnography at the National Museums of Kenya, which is under the Ministry of Culture, and I had this director, and I said, hey, Sultan, do something with them, you work with them, and they tell me there's something wrong with African culture. They are warriors. They were thinking of them as warriors or as primitive, as savages, whatever it was in their mind. I'm speaking rather bluntly, but they were very subtle. I couldn't believe it, what they were teaching us, because they had absolutely no idea about African cultures. By then, I had lived among 16 different tribes, ethnic cultures of Kenya. I knew about them. I've been collecting material culture with with them, which means I would be touching their objects, I would be feeling their objects. There's a lot of sensory knowledge I was getting out of them. And I studied the literature which was related to their products, their songs, their proverbs, their stories, oral stories. And I was completely in with them, actually. And to say that they have no culture, they are fighting, they were very, for me, they were civilized. And my PhD was on that. I had to defend, I had to say that what the curriculum teaches and what the exams teaches the African children of aesthetic is the inferior to what they actually come from, the cultures they come from. And I had to prove it, and I got honors for the thesis. I proved it. I was able to prove it with the whole panel. So how can these people come and tell me that they need me to civilize these people? So that was my shock.
Okay, and then then following that, what were the forces that began to cause you to move?
Yeah, just to connect with that. So after that, in 1994, but then the professors would ask me, but where's the proof? Where's the proof? You're talking about indigenous peacemaking and indigenous aesthetics and beauty. There was hardly any literature. So I had to start writing. I got this field assistants together, whatever. And then I started peace museums. And I had like 24 student curators, and they started building their own deal. And I said the only way we can do something about this is to talk among ourselves, people to people, cultures to cultures. Forget about this. Now remember, this was almost like working underground, and I forgot. I mean, it's the national institution is one thing, and the community museums are something quite different. And there's a big difference between them. Yeah. Okay. Then what happened was that I got a lot of funds, like from Ford Foundations, others. They were attracted to my project, but Kenya being what it is and what it was and probably what it is now, very corrupt. So my money would be absorbed and taken in by the director and the minister or whatever above them, and the director was politically connected. There was this conflict going on, competition going on between Raila and Kibaki, and he was in the Raila camp, and he would collect money and give it to him, and I don't know what, but anyway, he was very corrupt. He wouldn't let the money come in. And I had all the documentation, like the Ford Foundation gave me so much, and this and this. So ultimately, Ford Foundation took him to court. So his picture came in shackles like that. And then I would be called to witness. I gave my whole file of documents, everything. Now, so 3 times, and it was postponed next time, postponed next time. It went on for, I don't know how many months. But then after the 3rd time, I started getting threats on my life. If I come and witness, and my wife and everybody got really scared, because in Kenya, you just give somebody $500, they'll kill you. And this has been happening. And this has been happening to people who spoke out. We have the pogroms against intellectuals. So many of them. I was at the University of Nairobi when it started under Kenyatta and continued under Moi. But I really tried to keep myself very low. And then my sister came from over here, and she was doing quite well, their businesses, and she filled out the forms, everything for the Canadian embassies, and said, we are getting out. And I somehow managed to flee the country.
Okay. You've taken us through quite a period here where you were very successful in your endeavors to work with these different ethnic identities in Kenya. You were beginning to understand what peacemaking would mean. But then, because of all the money that was coming in, there was also a lot of corruption at the time, as you were telling us, and some monies were beginning to be misused, and there were investigations. And as a result of these court cases, your life and your family's life came under threat. And so you had to leave with your, in order to flee with your life, all your lives, and you had to leave behind everything that you had. And that was a very traumatic kind of event. So can you take us from there? What was it like for you as you were making these decisions? You had a sister who helped you get your immigration papers. And what was going through your process in your own mind as you were leaving behind such a successful career?
Yeah, I think I was numbed because it was so sudden.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this huge project going on in Kenya.
Right.
I established Peace Museum. 16 were already running. And I held all these consultancies, like with Ford Foundation, UN, so many others, and so I had a very fulfilling life, I thought. And so to leave suddenly like that, and of course I wanted to be ethical. The director and the others up the ladder in the hierarchy told me, just share the money, and they would even give me checks. Some checks I had to return. I said, where the hell did you get this check from? If it's from my account, I didn't sign for it, and and so at that time under Dr. Leakey, there was an investigation on corruption in Kenya and in the institutions under the government. One of them was a museum. So I gave him my whole file. I had all the details, I'm very particular about.
There was this investigation, and there was a court trial. So what was going through your mind as you're going to have to leave, and what was happening with you and your family as you're thinking about this transition you had to make?
Okay, so we left very suddenly, and we had to go. We had to go very quickly, and I had no time to really wind up a lot of things, and I think I lost a lot of things in between. Because the Iraq war was just starting. And I said, wow, we won't be able to travel. Heathrow will be closed if this starts. And Heathrow was closed for a couple of days, and then the missiles started, we started looking in the TV, how the strike, how Baghdad was stormed and all that. And I thought, we're just in the middle of this war, we had to get out. So we got out, we came here. Okay, my sister and my brother are here, and they really helped me to settle down. Mm-hmm. Materially, they were very good. But for me, I lived in a threshold, sitting on a threshold. My mind, my sleep, my dreams were always back in Kenya. Mm-hmm. And here, reality, I was here in Canada. I didn't know what was happening, I couldn't concentrate, nothing, so I started writing. I wrote 2,000 pages while sitting on the threshold. And the only consolation for the immigrant is, and of course I could get no work. Uh-huh. And people look at my CV, I give them my CV, I give them my some of my papers, published papers, I don't think so. They would want anybody there, like in the dialogue department at the SFU and so. Nobody wants somebody who's been a consultant to the UN on dialogue. You see, and that was stupid of me, because if I just said, oh, I just have masters and I have little experience, I probably had got a job. But like this, no. So anyway, so I wrote 2,000 pages, and I was unwinding. Where do we come from? What am I? Who am I? Yeah, because 20 plus years ago in Canada, it was different. Every second question that somebody you meet would say, "Where do you come from?" Where do you come from was a big question, and what do you tell them? Where do I come from?
That's good. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's why I wrote the books. 2000 to say, where do I come from?
Right.
This is where I come from. This is where who we are. Yeah. So, yeah. So
there was this
that's it.
catharsis.
And then I started getting some recognition, some invitations to read the book, talk about it, maybe give some workshops on writing ethnographic novels, things like that, yeah. And I started developing, well, creativity was a big channel for me to feel myself again. So, thinking and writing because I had ethnography as my background,
Right.
as an ethnographer, I was working, and now I was going into writing. So I started looking into ethnographic writing. What is ethnographic writing? And I found there are very few universities in the US, 2 or 3, that actually teach ethnographic writing.
Right.
And I thought, oh, this is so important for immigrants because they come with things, material. And my studies were in material culture. And how important are these things and how they cling to these things. Right. And for immigrants to start writing about themselves, about their histories and who they are, because it's very most of them find it very difficult to talk about themselves. But they just start talking about things, it's much easier, and then start opening up, and then they're able to talk a lot. So all the courses I gave, workshops I gave, short 5-6 lessons workshops were on stories from things, and I wrote a book about it for Canadians.
And by you spoke about coming to writing. You started writing your own work, the research and all that, and you learned how to create it in fiction form. And which book did you start with, and why? Did you have a publisher, and if not, why not?
Okay. Okay, so I wrote 2,000 pages, and I started then dividing these pages into 3 books. And of course, like 500 pages, I had to put them away. So each book was like 500 pages, of 1,500 remaining. And then I started polishing and trimming them. So the first book is called the Bead Bai. And this goes back to my childhood experience in the bead shop in Arusha, and what the beads mean to the fingers, and to the sight, to the eyes, the colors. So I tried to bring out the whole aesthetics through the eyes of the indigenous people, the Maasai, and through the eyes of the character who is called Motibai, who is a Khoja, a Satpanthi Khoja like I am. And so I'm looking at this interaction between a merchant settler's wife and an indigenous woman, and they're talking. And she had experience from her own culture, which was embroidering. So this book is about the material culture of her own shawl, which is called the bandhani, which was embroidered, and the Maasai bead collar, which is called emankiki. Yeah, so aesthetics come there. And of course, the Canadian publishers here were rejecting because they couldn't understand it. And one of them told me, this is not Canadian. But this we're talking about 20 years back. I don't know, people may have changed now. And so I didn't. So so I was lucky. I had a number of people who would read the book and they would like it, and they would, of course, do a little bit of technical, grammatical, spelling corrections. And I was able to self-publish, and it sold very well, especially in the communities. And it was also on the reading list in some universities in USA, surprisingly under African history, because there's a lot of the merchant coming into the rural area and merchant's wife and the women communicating among women. And some academics wrote papers about interactions, intercultural interactions through gender, through women. Yeah. And now this one begins from 1950s.
So which book is that?
Oh, this is Home Between Crossings. And this is now the Mau Mau period from 1950s to 1970s. 1970s, we were out of East Africa. So this is actually during the Mau Mau period. And again, all the books I bring in my own personal experiences and the stories I'd heard. And this one is on the Kanga. And now this is the intercultural relationships between the Khojas and the Swahilis.
So what is the Kanga?
Oh, a Kanga is a cotton cloth that originated and is used by the women at the coast, the Swahili women. But it is now spread all over East Africa, actually. Yeah. So this book now, each of my book has one item of material culture, and I work around it to make a story. This shows how the Kanga becomes an intermediary between two families divided by race. There was a Khoja man married to a black Swahili woman, and how the Kanga is used to bring the two families together. Yep. So that's the second book. It ends in 1990. Yeah. It ends in 1990, and then we begin this book, which is now about...
Which book is it?
Oh, this is called Motaj.
What is Motaj?
Motaj means... It's a very strong, emotionally burdened word, which means a dependence on somebody. You know, it's not a burden which is free of emotions. It is like, it comes from an Arabic word, motaj, which means a disabled person, you know, who is dependent on somebody. So when somebody is a motaj, it means he's an unwanted burden on the family, or the community, or anyone else. Yeah. So this is about seniors coming to Canada. And so the first character that I started with, the first book, now is a senior in 1990s coming to Canada. And roughly I followed the life of my mother. And here, now they have to live as dependent on their families because of the weather, other things. They cannot go out without a car. And there's a lot of, within the community I found that there's a lot of feeling that the elders have about losing their dignity. They feel humiliated because they are just nobody, because they have to live as motaj. And this book, now, first book was the Maasai and the Khoja. Second book was Swahili and the Khoja. The third book is the Mennonites in the Khoja. In the third book, I look at the quilt now as an object. The Mennonite quilting. And now there's a Mennonite stories here because I lived and worked with the Mennonites for more than 10 years. And I lived in Kenya with them, worked with them. I was a consultant for their agencies. I came and lived with them in Pennsylvania here, Akron, whatever. So I had some kind of insights and whatever. And of course I looked at the quilts. The quilts were everywhere in Pennsylvania. So this is, and then now I look at the stories of grandmother immigrants, how the stories of grandmother immigrants are similar in some ways, and especially grandmothers who are second-time settlers. The Mennonites were first settlers in the Ukraine, coming from Europe, and second time after the Russian Revolution, they came to Canada. One who dreams is called a prophet. Now this is an indigenous Turkana saying. You see, Turkana, they live in semi-deserts, cornflakes, whatever. Sometimes they have nothing. You think they have nothing, but they say we have a dream. And they say the one who dreams is called a prophet. And I found, how true is that? Oprah Winfrey calls this the power of intention, dreaming. And then you so this is my own journey after 1994, looking for peace, indigenous way of making peace. So it took me 14 years to write that, but it is step by step my journey in Kenya, working among different indigenous cultures. And I talk about 10 walking sticks of the elders and 10 of their stories and how. And incidentally, now this book is used as a textbook at the universities in Kenya. And I'm teaching this course. Of course, my challenge here was actually, you're just nobody when you're an immigrant. You know, first of all, everything it's strange. Mostly how people look at you, and there's a way that I found the Canadians in the street, in the transit, in the buses, even in Jamaat Khana or prayer halls or wherever. You see, they have a way of looking which I find is very different from the way that I was used to. There is no warmth in that communication. That eye contact has no warmth. There's no humanness. I don't know what you call it. In that kind of, they look over, like. But if you talk to them, they're very nice. They can tell you anything like that. But you see, their eyes would go between you or over you like that. I found it like that. And I find that between, with my own extended families here also, the children and others, they're just like that. So there is that I found very odd in Canada. I don't know if I explained to you.
How do you cope with it?
Okay.
How do you confront it?
I don't know. I think, I think writing the books, I was able to work through my trauma. But it was just writing. And yeah, I think that was easy for me to do it. And then speaking it when I was invited to read. Speaking it, and it was amazing how many people came up and shared the same experiences. So that was comforting. But I don't think so one can completely get over this trauma. So like writing the Muhtaj is about the obligation of being dependent. What it means to be dependent and to be nobody. What it means to be a Muhtaj. So that was also unraveling myself, my feeling, putting it into writing. And I thought that would be over. Yeah, and to be recognized, to feel you are somebody. Yeah. Basically, you lose your dignity. You're humiliated when you become an immigrant, and especially a poor immigrant, jobless.
This is a very rich story and it has many ups and downs. And what we want to do now is think about, as you've gone through this journey, a very painful journey at times, how you have found hope in your own journey. And what would you like to think about if your others are thinking about your story and trying to understand your narrative as compared to theirs? Your narrative is not dissimilar to many immigrants who come to this country, but there is also hope and inspiration. And we want to think about now, as you have kind of obviously been very successful in telling your own stories, and it's been good for your own catharsis and your way of coming to find meaning in all of this. What are you thinking about now as you look into the future?
Yeah. I I still have one foot in Africa and one foot over here.
Mm-hmm.
So over here, I've been able to give at least run some courses on stories for things for seniors, and I had wonderful students who told their own stories of migration and where they come from. They are all seniors like me, and you're amazed to hear how connecting are these stories. Hungarian, Russian, English, Scottish, Irish, whatever. How connecting their stories are. And they tell a story from a thing. I tell them to bring a thing that is close to them from the old country. And they bring it and they talk about it and how they came. And they always talk about the very, very difficult first years here. Yeah. So that's one part. And the other part is my journey in Africa, in Kenya. So I'm teaching this course there, and I have some PhDs whom I also supervise. So I'm able to give back, and that's a great satisfaction. And it's peaceful, and I feel contented that all this knowledge, all these things I had accumulated, I'm now. For the first time in Kenya and probably in Africa, this book has enabled one university to start a course on indigenous knowledge and decolonization. And it's gone wonderful now. I think they're completing the first, last few lessons on it. It's gone wonderful. Here in Canada itself, I have been mentoring and other students have been following me. One is Kimberly Baker.
Mm-hmm.
She's a doctorate now, and she followed my footsteps and made her own. And she went to every peace museum in Kenya and what I had established and what I did in Kenya. It took her 6 trips to Kenya in 6 years to complete what took me 40 years. So, I mean, she did. And so that's my satisfaction. And I have others I have mentored from all different races, all different cultures in Canada. And they are now following me and calling me Dakitari, like they call me in Kenya.
Which means
doctor.
A doctor.
Dakitari means in Kiswahili means a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So that is my satisfaction, and I'm very happy to mentor students here also if they want to follow indigenous Africa and their own thesis, yeah, and especially if they are from Africa, immigrants from Africa. What we get to is how to speak about themselves and their cultures. So when Kimberly Baker, who is a Caucasian Canadian born, and Dr. Kimani, who is from Kenya, who did his also PhD at UBC, when they defended their PhDs, the whole panel was talking about Utu Utu means humanity in Swahili, and that's what this book is about. One Who Dreams is about Utu, humanity. And they were now talking about Utu and talking about African indigenous knowledge as well as methodology and how important it is. You know, over here they tell me to talk with the First Nations and Aboriginal, but I find it very difficult. I've tried to do that because, especially the younger ones, they've been so removed from their histories and their cultures because I think this this cutting of from their heritage by the residential schools, 3 or 4 generations have been completely wiped out. While in Africa we are still, if, in spite of colonization, we are still intact in a way with the traditional knowledge and all that. Of course, the elites and the others who are complete, but a vast majority still lives in the homesteads.
Good. So thank you. This is a very nice conclusion to a story where you've pulled together how you have worked both with people here who are interested in your work and following you, and then people back in Africa that you've connected with and even started a course.
Continuing, yeah.
So I think that's a really nice place to stop and to as we reflect on your total narrative.
Yeah, and this Zoom has really helped because of Zooming COVID. I mean, because of COVID, Zoom became so refined and so clear that now you can just pick up your WhatsApp. You know, I pick up my WhatsApp, and one of my students is in Ituri Forest in the Congo, and I can talk to him today through WhatsApp.
Yeah, yeah.
And through Zoom, I can get into the slums of Kenya in the little shacks and all that, even with WhatsApp and all that. Isn't that amazing? I think this COVID 3 years has really boosted this.
Thank you so much, Sultan Bhai. This has been an amazing talk and discussion. We are both very grateful to you that you have given us this opportunity and humbled by your knowledge and by this dialogue that we have had. And I hope our viewers will benefit from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sultan.
Thank you.
It's a really an amazing journey, and I think it would help others as they look at their own.
Thank you. Okay. Well, today I'm going to talk about my books. I have written a trilogy that's from 1890s to 1990. It's a story of bead merchants' family, and in particular of one character that I call Moti Bai. She was both the daughter and wife of a bead merchant in Eastern Africa. Before it was just Eastern Africa, because the whole East Africa was a British colony. Okay, so what's my book about? It is, let me read from here, which is better I read because I'm a storyteller and I can go into narratives, many narratives. So let me just read to you from the third book, which is called Mothaj. Now, Mothaj is a word we speak in many Indian languages, which are Sanskrit based, but it's also in Arabic and also in Swahili. So it means being a burden, and a burden that brings discomfort. You know, it's an unwanted burden on somebody that becomes a Mothaj. Okay. Mothaj is the third and final book in the trilogy of the Eastern African Khoja Ismaili migrations and settlements from 1890s to 1990s. The three books are written as fictional ethnographies inspired by true events, my observations, and community stories. I come from I come from Khoja Ismaili community, a religious cultural minority in Eastern Africa, and I worked as an ethnographer, often living among and working with diverse cultural communities of East Africa from 1973 to 2003. Now, during my lifetime, I also came in close contact with other cultural communities, and I talk about them here in my three books. These are the Maasai, as in the first book called Bead Bai. Um, the second one, Swahili, that I talk about in the third book, Home Between Crossings, and sorry, second book, and the third book, the Mennonites, that I talk about in Mothaj. Now, these are the three cultural communities I worked with. Now, what I write about are um, artifacts which are made by women and treasured by women. And I write the stories of the artifacts, how they came out to be, what they mean, and how they reflect on wider community and cultural stories, and especially how these stories interact with other communities and other stories of other people. Okay, so in the first one, the artifact that I'm talk about is called emankiki, which is this big one that the Maasai women put around their shoulders. And okay, now let me read from here. This chapter is chapter 42. It's called Talking Colors. Kini and Titini feel confident enough to tap my nose ring and ask me, what is this that is winking on your nose? Of course, the Indian women wear nose rings and they were fascinated by it. On um, Look at my mankiki, says Kini as she throws her chest up with a swift thrust. Her neck ring, the entire splendor of colors resting on her shoulders, jumps up. Look at my mankiki, says Titini. She tosses her beads up from her shoulder blades. I notice Titini's emankiki is of exactly the same pattern as Kini's. Its richness fills my eyes. The colors warm my heart. Sidai, so perfectly beautiful, says Ole Lekekani. The emankiki pattern is one of the Moain Sidain art of making beauty in colors. Moain Sidain has many arrangements in colors that please the eye. The pattern Keri is one, Moain Sidain is another. So perfect that God is jealous and schemes how to be a woman. He laughs with a rare laugh for an elder, not in front of women. Now, these are the different patterns that Oleneke Kani is referring to. All right. So I read from the second book now, which is on the Kanga. The Kanga is a cloth like this. I just picked it up. My wife wears this quite often. And the cloth has a proverb on it. Now, let me see if I can find the proverb on this one. Oh, sitting in this squash place, I can't really um, see the proverb here, but I have to read it to you. It's a very beautiful one, I know. Mhm. Here it is. Okay, here's a proverb. Every Kanga piece has a proverb. It says, chuki ni chukie moyo, moyo wangu ni ajie. You can throw hate at me, but leave my heart alone. All right. Now, let me read to you about the Kanga from this book. The chapter is called The Cloth That Speaks Wisdom. Ma Gorbai gives a box of Mary bearing biscuits to Isa. He takes it and quickly climbs into Nana's bed, wedging in between her back and the pillow. The Kanga was bequeathed to us, the Swahili women of the coast of Africa, by our ancestral slave mothers in the households of wealthy Arab royals, merchants, and sailors of the Indian Ocean. The cloth carries love in it and sorrows of their hearts. It speaks wisdoms in elders' minds and shows colors in patterns of sea waters and migrations. Together, they speak lyrics of cloth art of the Indian Ocean. I hear it in my body when I wear the Kanga, when I'm sad and seek joy, and also when I'm happy. And when to show my happiness, wasikia to us in Swahili also means, do you feel? Nana nods, her head tilted, lips stretched down, smiling as if to say, it's up to you, my child. Colors maroon, white, and yellow spill over from the Kanga. Thinly pressed brown, crispy dry jasmine flowers drop to the floor. Motibai picks up the dead flowers with care of veneration and places them one at a time back into the kasha. I feel the pulse of the Kanga throbbing in veins of my arms, says Motibai, speaking in Swahili without the Indian inflection in her voice. Ma Gorbai turns around to Auntie Khoja. In Kachi, she says, pointing to the printed word, what does it say? She cannot read the alphabet in another script. Dege, kila dege huruka na mbawa zake. She reads, every bird flies on its own wings, she says in Kachi. Now, each of my book has a proverb, okay, which tells you the theme of the book. So this one is, and I use the indigenous language of the culture group that I'm talking about. This one says in Swahili, every bird flies on its own wings. Okay, and the first one I showed, this one, it says in Gujarati, Kota Motina Sacha Vepari, that you may be a merchant of fake beads, but you are an authentic trader. It makes a lot of sense in Gujarati, maybe not so much in English. And this book is in Plodish, this proverb. Plodish is a Mennonite language. And what I forgot what to mean. Yeah, it says something about, yeah, it says, um, well, there are many interpretations of this proverb. The book, the way it is used, it says that we are like patchwork quilt dispersed all around the globe, but we are one people. Right. So, okay, now I go to read from the third book about the quilt. My Grootmoeder, that is Polish for grandmother, Stitch this quilt by herself, said Melody to Motibai, showing her the quilt. It's called log cabin. The dark and bright pieces come together to make the design. Obviously, she was hiding her family pride in a veiled modesty. But as soon as she opened the folds of the quilt, spreading it on the carpeted floor of Ma's room, her pride, as it were, jumped over her groomed Christian humility. When my grandmother gave me the quilt, she told me that in life I will come across people who are like the patchwork quilt. Some are annoying, like the coarse misfit patches that you do not seem to belong to the pattern. Others are comforting, like the pieces of soft flannel. Yep. Rick is the- Okay, this is my latest book. It was launched in 2018 by Gugi wa Thiong'o. So, and this is called One Who Dreams is Called a Prophet. It's a Turkana proverb. And, it's a proverb that says the power of intention, the power of dream. And, and this is based on 10 walking sticks. Okay, just ordinary walking sticks. And it's my journey. It's based on my journey around Kenya. And this is about Kenya in the middle. And
Sultan, Sultan Bhai, are these the sticks on your right hand side?
can you see them?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can see.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Those
yeah.
are the sticks. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, okay. All right. Now, okay, now, you see, from 1990s, I was the head of ethnography at the National Museums of Kenya, and I was challenged to say something about indigenous cultures of peace. In fact, all the information we were getting was from the North. And a lot of Americans, especially Americans, were coming to teach us how to make peace. As if Africans and others didn't know what peace meant and what is peace, you see. And of course, the American Senate had passed $20 million at that time in 1990, after the Rwanda massacre, for Eastern Africa to teach Africans to make peace, basically. So they had many workshops going on, and I was the head of ethnography at National Museums of Kenya. I felt very humiliated and concerned that these people are coming to teach us make peace, as if we are savages and we never lived in peace. They never talked about the war on the resources, yeah, and on colonialism and what happened. It was never like that. Okay, so I had to go on a journey to look for where are the sources of indigenous peace. And then, so this is the book I wrote. I write about 10 different cultural groups and how they see peace. All right. So let me see if I can read from some of this. Okay. When Lama came to the market at Kataka, he saw Kot, Mukwe, Jua, Malian, Walima, and Jua women. There were children running around. Some were breastfeeding in laps of the vendors sitting under canopies of acacia trees. There were goats and camels. Kids bleated over the babble of voices, talks in between, loud laughter, quarrels, and sometimes even a song. Each community had come to the market to barter, sell, or buy. Okay. Okay, I'll just skip in between and say, we, the Jua, revere beauty in colors of sky and earth. Bead patterns beauty our bodies and speak to proclaim a silent parable, a proverb, or a riddle of peace. We say beauty is peace in our worship. We hold wisdom in our languages, in colors of our beads and dreams. We are all protected by the divine and spirits of our forefathers who own the land, who inhabit the shades of peace trees. So what happened was I started finding a lot of symbols and references to peace in African indigenous languages and symbols in nature. The peace trees offer wood to make our peace staffs, like my Koko Kigom. Each staff is crafted a little differently, yet each is the same. Peace staffs are like the Jua language. It's different in different regions, yet it's one language. Like me, the elders of Yeta carry peace staffs of their people to support their frail bodies, control the anger of young men, and spread wisdom. So what I write about are about the 10 peace staffs, what they mean to the people and what they mean to the touch of the hand. I try to work in this book. I've tried to work a lot on the senses and how the senses speak to you when words don't. So it was very difficult for me to explain in English and to foreigners what is peace to Africans, because peace is sensed and I can only speak of it in metaphors, parables, stories, as it comes through the oral literature. Africa is a continent of 100,000 proverbs, parables, and riddles, told in 2,000 languages, and 1,000 more songs, stories, and dances. They speak of wisdom of peace and how to live. The vessel that carries them is the memory of beauty. I'm one such a memory, she said. The belt I wear over my unborn is called leketio or katikati. Rivers, lakes, forest groves, and mountains are beaded on my belt like proverbs, parables, and riddles on my tongue. The eye that sees and the tongue that speaks of Utu are in one calabash of landscape of beauty and abundance. And that is the peace we know. So, you see how peace is said in metaphors, in beauty, in visual images? Yeah. So I had to write this book to explain what is peace to in context of the African philosophy of Utu. Utu comes from the word Mtu. Mtu means a human. Utu means humanity. Humanity means peace. Okay, so for example, Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, they use Ubuntu, which is the same root, which was the philosophy of bringing together a country divided by apartheid, by race. It was such a wise thing to use Ubuntu. But today, nobody acknowledges, and there are a lot of Ubuntu workshops and discussions and lectures going on without saying the origin is in the African concept of peace. The beat of the drum makes sound patterns in the ear, like colors speaking to the eye, connecting landscapes. Our forefathers settled in vast deserts long before the white people arrived and made it their home. After 100 years of white men ruling us with the Bible and the gun, the black man became the new ruler. He kept the Bible and the gun and added the machete. So this book goes from colonialism to neo-colonialism, the present time, and how the conflicts have continued, and through the conflicts, how Utu, the African philosophy of peace, kind of cracks through and wants to come out and want to be known. And it's very, I mean, it's very sensual in the terms of the senses. How the senses, the eye, the touch, the tongue, the smell, affect your thinking of peace. The sensation of colors to his eyes touched him. He began feeling the pulsations of beads, but could not shape them in words. He imagined how the leketio was created, bead by bead, on tips of 3 fingers, the eye and the heart, while the maker sang, putting the rhythm of a stitching in and out of the leather band. Yep. The old man lived with Alama in his shack. Every day, children brought roasted maize, sweet potatoes, and cassava to them. They also brought cow's milk and black dotted green bananas. The two men told each other stories and made them wiser. How peace was given to mankind in ways of birds, animals, waters, mountains, and trees, dawn and dusk, the nature's way. Another cognate of peace of Utu is nature. How nature is peace. So I bring that up. They felt it in their hearts that they should dream what was lost. So they could not reclaim nature's ways of Utu. So they could reclaim nature's way of Utu that could give them, that they could give to their children, so they might also live in peace. Right. So this is book which is now used as a textbook at the university in Kenya, Nairobi, and we just finished the first course, which is based on this book. It's called Indigenous Knowledge and Decolonization. You can decolonize, yes, fine, and verbally it's so easy to talk about academics and talk about but what is the replacement? So indigenous, you have to replace it with indigenous level knowledge, or most of it, or where you can, when you decolonize. And I'm so happy they finished the first course, and now the university is revising and seeing how to continue with the successful completion of the first ever course on indigenous knowledge and decolonization in an African university. Uh, Thank you very much. Tariq, I put in a good word for me. What can I do? You told me to talk on this. Say it again, Tariq, please. Oh.
Thank you so much. Because we are coming to the end of this thing, this recording, we only have, I think, about 5 minutes. Are there any final words that you would like to say in this? Please go ahead.
I think this recordings for Museum of Migration. You see, in my trilogy, the last book, it becomes stories of grandmothers, and how the stories of immigrant grandmothers could be recorded, could be told, and especially shown how they interconnect. Stories of grandmothers connect, and especially, like, I'll talk about the stories of the Mennonite grandmothers and the Khoja Ismaili grandmothers. Now both are second time settlers in Canada. Both for the Mennonites, the first diaspora from Germany, Europe was Ukraine. The second, and for the Ismaili Khojas, the first diaspora was Eastern Africa. The second diaspora is Canada. And both are kind of ethno-religious groups. Now, how women's stories and grandmother's stories connect, and especially I'm interested in the second time settler grandmothers and how they connect with their thinking, with their past in the first diaspora. They're growing up in the first diaspora, whether in Ukraine or Africa, and now growing up here in the second diaspora. Many of them coming here after 50s and 60s years old. So they are senior migrants. And when I really would like to put up an exhibition of the artifacts of different, for the Museum of Migration, of artifacts of grandmothers from different cultural groups and what stories they tell, emphasizing the connecting stories with our shared humanity and migrations. Thank you, Tariq. This is my concluding wisdom.
Thank you so much.
All right. Now, let me read to you about the Kanga from this book. The chapter is called The Cloth That Speaks Wisdom. Ma Bai gives a box of Mary bearing biscuits to Isa. He takes it and quickly climbs into Nana's bed, wedging in between her back and the pillow. The Kanga was bequeathed to us, the Swahili women of the coast of Africa, by our ancestral slave mothers in the households of wealthy Arab royals, merchants, and sailors of the Indian Ocean. The cloth carries love in it and sorrows of their hearts. It speaks wisdoms in elders' minds and shows colors in patterns of sea waters and migrations. Together, they speak lyrics of cloth art of the Indian Ocean. I hear it in my body when I wear the Kanga, when I'm sad and seek joy, and also when I'm happy. And when to show my happiness, wasikia to us in Swahili also means, do you feel? Nana nods, her head tilted, lips stretched down, smiling as if to say, it's up to you, my child. Colors maroon, white, and yellow spill over from the Kanga. Thinly pressed brown, crispy dry jasmine flowers drop to the floor. Motibai picks up the dead flowers with care of veneration and places them one at a time back into the kasha. I feel the pulse of the Kanga throbbing in veins of my arms, says Motibai, speaking in Swahili without the Indian inflection in her voice. Ma Gorbai turns around to Auntie Khoja. In Kachi, she says, pointing to the printed word, what does it say? She cannot read the alphabet in another script. Dege, kila dege huruka na mbawa zake. She reads, every bird flies on its own wings. She says in Kachi. Now, each of my book has a proverb, okay, which tells you the theme of the book. So this one is, and I use the indigenous language of the cultural group that I'm talking about. This one says in Swahili, every bird flies on its own wings. Okay. And The first one I showed, this one, it says in Gujarati, Kota Motina Sacha Vepari, that you may be a merchant of fake beads, but you are an authentic trader. It makes a lot of sense.
It's the same. It reminds me of that. The bigger branch is the trunk. It's all stiff and frozen, but around it, the small branches and the leaves, they move around like feathers.